The press is going nuts over a so-called failed interview that Bernie Sanders had with the New York Daily News. Now, during this interview with the editorial board for the tabloid publication, there were a number of instances where Bernie Sanders appeared to not know what he was talking about. But what's the reality? Did Bernie really not have any idea what he was talking about when he was asked about breaking up the big banks? Or were the questions purposely confusing? And did the person asking the questions even know what he was talking about? Now, there have been a number of big-name publications who have come out in Bernie's defense, publications that have actually been pretty critical of him in the past. One of them is the New York Times, and the other one is the Huffington Post. Now, Ryan Grim with the Huffington Post has been very critical of Bernie Sanders in the past, but he felt that he needed to defend Bernie in a recent piece that he wrote. So let me go into the details of what Ryan Grim felt was injustice in the New York Daily News article. Now, in several instances, it's the Daily News editors who are bungling the facts in an interview designed to show that Sanders doesn't understand the fine points of policy. In questions about breaking up big banks, the powers of the Treasury Department, and drone strikes, the editors were simply wrong on details. So let me give you just a quick rundown of what was talked about when asked about breaking up the big banks. So the Daily News reporter asks him, okay, so we understand you want to break up the big banks, but who decides? And Bernie Sanders was very clear. Well, the Treasury Department could decide, or under Dodd-Frank, my administration would be able to decide. And then all of a sudden, the Daily News reporter mentions the feds. Well, the feds wouldn't necessarily get involved. That doesn't really make much sense, and it seemed to trip Bernie Sanders up a little bit. So let me get into that. Sanders said that if the Treasury Department deemed it necessary to do so, the bank would go about unwinding itself as it best saw fit to get to a size that the administration considered no longer a systemic risk to the economy. Sanders said this could be done with new legislation or through administrative authority under Dodd-Frank. Now, in previous instances, Hillary Clinton said the same thing. Under Dodd-Frank, the administration would have the authority to do that. But of course, Hillary Clinton didn't get any criticism for that because it's the truth and there's no need to criticize her for that.
You know what, Anna, let me step in here and just actually give a little bit of the interaction between the Daily News editorial team and Bernie Sanders, because I think it's really instructive and goes to the heart of what a smear job this interview was. And you can tell from the very first question that they asked all the way to the last question they asked that they were intending to, quote unquote, trap Bernie Sanders. Now, you want to ask hard questions, we're going to be on your side. And I'll break that down in a little bit for you guys as to what questions make sense and don't make sense. But this is a good example of what doesn't make sense. Because, so he, as Anna explained, says, well, we would use the Dodd-Frank authority and the Treasury Department, just like Hillary Clinton has said. No different at all, right? Then the Daily News steps in and says, but do you think that the Fed now has that authority? Now, the Federal Reserve was not in Bernie Sanders' answer, so why did they bring up the Federal Reserve? And then Sanders says, well, I don't know if the Fed has it, but I think the administration can have it. See, he's right. The Federal Reserve is not part of this question. The administration has the authority to break up the big banks. The Federal Reserve would have nothing to do with breaking up the big banks. He is correct. They are incorrect. But they come back and say, how? How does the president turn J.P. Morgan Chase or have the Treasury turn to any of those banks and say, now you must do X, Y, and Z? Sanders says, well, you do have the authority under the Dodd-Frank legislation to do that, make that determination. Daily News, you do? Just by Federal Reserve fiat, you do? No, not by Federal Reserve fiat. He didn't say that. You said that, right? So then, oh, the unbearable establishment. Yeah. The unbearable lightness of being that they are, right? Yeah. They're so light, they have no idea what they're talking about. So the Tina Browns of the world come out, and of course every Washington Post writer and every Daily Beast writer, right? And Tina Brown, if you don't know her, you're not alone. Almost no one in the real world knows her, but among the elite country club circles, she's very well esteemed, okay? And so she used to run Newsweek and Daily Beast, so you can see where this is going. And she comes out and she's like, oh, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. No, Tina, you're embarrassing. Do you know anything about the Federal Reserve and who actually breaks up banks? And by the way, and if you think that the Treasury does not have the authority to break up the big banks, then apparently you think Hillary Clinton is also embarrassing. Barack Obama is also embarrassing. No, but the establishment likes those people. But more important than the establishment reaction to this, which is completely and utterly wrong, and Ryan Grim with an excellent article debunking it, is what the Daily News itself is doing. Why do that trick? Why? I mean, look, there's two possibilities. One is if you read this by itself, well, you could look at it and go, maybe they're bunglers, right? They're serial bunglers. They don't know, and they just keep saying Federal Reserve when they mean Treasury, right? Or if you look at the whole context of the interview, you realize, no, they meant to try to trip him up with these dirty questions.
Not only that, Cenk, they intentionally did it to manipulate him and manipulate his answers in a way that would make it seem as though he has no idea what he's talking about, that Hillary Clinton's narrative of him talking a big talk but not really having a plan in place is a reality. That's not the reality. And not only did they do that to manipulate him, they did that to manipulate everyone, anyone who supports him, including myself, by the way, right? This is stuff that I follow up on, that I read about, that I genuinely care about. And when I originally read the transcripts and when I read the response to the transcripts, gotta be honest with you, I kind of sat back and cringed and I wondered, oh my God, is it true? Does he really understand how to break up the big banks? Because the wording that they used was confusing, right? And so if I felt that way, I can't imagine how any other average American who doesn't do this for their job would feel, right? And so you have the establishment piling on and continuing this ridiculous narrative that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But if you just read in a little deeper, you realize they're purposely mentioning things that trip him up, like the Fed.
So two parts to that, as part of that goes along with that trick is, they ask him questions that are unanswerable, forcing him to give the correct answer, which is, I don't know. So if we capture a terrorist abroad, where should we interrogate him? I don't know. Where did we capture him? Right? But if you keep asking a series of those questions, and within the 18 pages that this interview is in, you have 5 or 6 I don't know. It's like, oh, he doesn't know. He doesn't. Well, where the fuck did we capture the guy? How would you know? Maybe they should interrogate him in Pakistan if they caught him in Pakistan. But if they caught him in a place like Somalia, they might want to get him on an aircraft carrier and interrogate him there and then eventually get him to the U.S. And in that particular case, Bernie says, look, if you're asking me, do I want to try them in American justice system and put them in American prisons? Is that safe enough to do? The answer is yes. That's the correct answer. But the idiots in the establishment are like, he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know.
So,
okay, and one more thing, Anna.
Okay.
The second part of that is they'll throw in specifics like, they're like, oh, as you probably know about the Metropolitan Life case. I'm knee deep in this. I mean, I read this stuff religiously. I don't know the Metropolitan Life case. And all those idiots on TV, yeah, what's the Metropolitan Life case? Which one is it, right? I would be shocked if 1% of them got the right answer. And then they're trying to like, Metropolitan Life, they didn't know it.
Yeah.
Right? How the hell would you know the specifics of that particular case? It's not like it's a situation that is talked about all the time in the news. It's not. So when you ask that question, especially the way they ask it, Daily News, okay, you saw, I guess, what happened with Metropolitan Life. That's meant to say, oh, you didn't? Oh, you don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, but the specificity of the questions asked is remarkable. I mean, can you imagine someone like Trump or even someone like Hillary Clinton being asked the same questions, right? First of all, if Trump was asked those questions, he'd leave the interview immediately, right? Because he would call it as he sees it. These are literally gotcha questions. Look, I usually do not believe candidates when they say that they were asked gotcha questions, right? Sarah Palin was notorious for that because she would be asked what kind of newspaper she wants to read or likes to read, and she couldn't answer that. That's not a gotcha question. That's about personal preference, and it's just trying to show an audience what you like to read. If you don't read something, then you would consider that a gotcha question. But something like Metropolitan Life, I mean, anyway, so there's that. But I want to give you...
I'd love to ask Trump, by the way, was Metropolitan Life fantastic or a mess?
I mean, he might find a way to weasel his way out of that conundrum, right? He might just say, it was a mess. I want to make better Metropolitan Life situations. Moving on.
Yeah, we're gonna make it fantastic going forward.
Yeah. All right, but I want to give you guys another example in regard to foreign policy questions. Now, we've talked about how Bernie Sanders isn't necessarily the strongest candidate when it comes to talking about foreign policy. Hillary Clinton tends to be a little more confident because of her experience. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's made good foreign policy decisions. Notoriously, she voted in favor of invading Iraq, and that didn't really work out so well. But they asked the following to Bernie Sanders. President Obama has taken the authority for drone attacks away from the CIA and given it to the U.S. military. Some say that that has caused difficulties in zeroing in on terrorists and ISIS leaders. Do you believe that he's got the right policy there? Okay, so his answer was, I don't know the answer to that. And part of the reason why he didn't know the answer to that is because Obama didn't give the U.S. military the ability to make decisions about drone strikes. He proposed it, and then later he decided not to go along with it. So the CIA is still making those decisions. These are confusing-ass questions where Bernie's probably thinking to himself, wait, what? When did that happen?
So there's two problems with that question. So one is they're wrong. It didn't happen that way. He proposed it and pulled it back, as Anna says. So then how do you answer a question that's wrong? Do you agree with President Obama on something he didn't do? What's a riddle within a puzzle? So it's not really how the saying goes. Okay. So secondly, should the CIA or the military have the right to use drones? Well, that is an enormously hard question because that involves, and I do know this stuff inside and out, well, sometimes the military gets overzealous with the use, JSOC does, and other times it's the CIA. Sometimes CIA has the intelligence that they then give to the military that then actually takes the drone strike. But if you allow the authority to be just under the CIA, sometimes we're worried about accountability within the CIA because so much of what they do is secret. Okay, now, only the president really knows, and his inner team obviously, how the CIA and the military is using it on a day-to-day basis, because it's all secret. We have some leaks about it, and that's why I know what I know, right? But to ask any random senator or almost anyone else in the country, who's better equipped to handle drone strikes, CIA or the military? I would have to know so many top secret things to answer that question. That's actually literally a question where you really can't quite answer it until you're president and they lay out for you, here's what the CIA has done in their drone strikes, and here's what JSOC has done with their military strikes. So this is a question designed to screw them over because it has no answer. So the guilty party here is very clear as you read throughout this entire interview. Almost every one of these questions was designed to trip them up. I mean, look, it's so obvious. They asked him about the Newtown massacre. And for example, they asked him about the assault rifles. He says, I'm against assault rifles. They're like, so you think that, that it's okay to use them? He's like, wait, I just said I was against them, right? And then they say, okay, but there's a lawsuit where they're suing the gun manufacturers. And Bernie says, look, if the gun manufacturers, for example, sold a ton of bullets or weapons to somebody when they know that they might be using it for illicit purposes, then go ahead and sue them. But if you're suing them for creating a legal product, the problem isn't the lawsuit. The issue is we should make that product illegal. I want to make it illegal. I want to make the assault weapons illegal.
Yeah.
So hold on. Yeah. So then the Daily News answers, so you think the lawsuit is baseless? What? He didn't say that at all. He didn't use that word, and he didn't say that. And then the next day, they run, in fact, we have that graphic. Run graphic 6 for me. They run this headline at the Daily News after the interview. Bernie's Sandy Hook shame callously defends gun makers against Newtown kin lawsuit. No, the whole thing was an ambush. It was the Rains of Castamere, okay? They invited him to a red wedding, and they took out all their knives, and they used it immediately on him. And you could tell in the dirty questions they asked in a way that were unanswerable. This is the most classic, when did you stop beating your wife questions, okay? There is no right answers here. They know it. They wanted to use it to put a hatchet in him. And that's exactly what they did. And the establishment press couldn't wait for it. And they all jumped in with all their hatchets at once. I mean, you're telling me in a campaign where one side doesn't have any idea of any policies. Trump just said that he'd like to get rid of the Department of Environmental. Okay? You're going to accuse Bernie Sanders of not knowing enough policy when he goes to the minutia of what his tax plans would be on single payer in order to pay for it, on his college programs in order to pay for it. He tells you exactly where he would raise the taxes. And then they do this because they're out to get him. It's obvious. It's obvious. Hey, Daily News, how much money did you give to Hillary Clinton? We'll find out soon enough.